Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling. Today is episode 28 of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast, and I'm a little nervous about this episode because I'm going to be talking about homeschooling with ADHD. I'm going to be talking about our ADHD story, how we homeschool with ADHD, and what it is like having kids with ADHD. So the reason I'm talking about it is because I have received quite a few questions and comments, particularly since we shared our medication story with Daniel about ADHD. And because I feel there's a huge stigma in the homeschool community when it comes to ADHD and homeschooling and medication, or just things in general, not even just in the homeschool community, just ADHD in general has such a huge stigma that goes along with it. And I want to share with you some tips and resources and some encouragement if you are homeschooling a child with ADHD that I hope will help you. So for us, I remember years ago, I helped a friend of mine homeschool her ADHD child. She was going through foster care classes at the time, and he would come over to our house once a week and homeschool with us. And this child and I, through the years, butted heads many times because he wasn't the stereotypical good child that I like to have. I like to have kids that sat still and listened, and he was a constant ball of energy. Great kid, love him, still love him to this day. They're good friends of mine. But he was so hyper and couldn't sit still, required constant redirection. And like I said, wasn't the picture perfect homeschool child that my girls were. And I remember telling her that she was a saint for homeschooling a boy with ADHD, and I could just not do it. Now, keep in mind, I was homeschooling with ADHD. One of my daughters has ADHD, but ADHD with girls is so different than ADHD with boys. And I knew I just did not have the patience to homeschool a boy with ADHD. But God has a sense of humor. So, shortly after we began homeschooling, I had my daughter evaluated for ADHD. Now, the reasons being were she had some social awkwardness and some impulsiveness issues that really did not fit her age at the time. And honestly, they were embarrassing to me. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, which I am, which is one reason I'm a little nervous about this episode, because I'm going to be real. They were embarrassing. Some of her little quirks were embarrassing, and I felt that people blamed those quirks and her awkwardness on her being homeschooled. And I couldn't fix them. I tried to do all of the things to fix them, quote unquote, and I couldn't. So I had her evaluated for ADHD because I needed to know that these issues that she had were not because she was homeschooled, particularly because at the time we were still receiving a lot of backlash from my family for homeschooling. And I needed to know that there was a reason behind her quirks that had nothing to do with her being homeschooled. So I had her evaluated for ADHD, and they said that she had it, of course. And I had her evaluated again, not because I felt I couldn't homeschool her, but because I just wanted to know the reason behind those quirks. So we got her diagnosis, and I read some amazing books to help me understand her ADHD. Now, I never really had to do much to fit her special needs into our homeschool. With her, homeschooling with ADHD was easy. Now, a couple of books and resources that really, really helped me with her was doing research on ADHD with girls. So girls with ADHD, which now looking back, I think without a doubt, I probably have ADHD and was just never diagnosed with it. I was impulsive. I had some little social anxiety quirks. Didn't really understand crowds or tones or things like that. And yeah, without a doubt, looking back, I do believe I had ADHD. And with her doing research on homeschooling on girls with ADHD really, really helped a lot because they're not the stereotypical ADHD symptoms that you would think of. I'm not going to get into symptoms or diagnosis or anything like that on this podcast. I'm more or less going to share with you my story, things that helped in our homeschool, and just talk about homeschooling with ADHD in general. So if you want to look into diagnosis or things like that, then there's tons of resources out there. But two books that really, really helped me was Girls with ADHD. I cannot remember the name of the book, but I will find the name and leave it in the show notes. But the biggest one was the book, The Gift of ADHD. And there's also an activity guide that goes along with that. And The Gift of ADHD really, really helped me with her because it helped me recognize that those quirks and those things that I saw was wrong with her were gifts that God had given her, and that there are strengths that go along with those. And now, fast forward, here we are 6-7 years later, and I could totally see how God is using those gifts and those quirks that I wanted to fix in her and that a public school would have wanted to fix in her, but He is using those for His glory. And that book really, really changed how I personally looked at ADHD and helped me a lot. But it really, really helped me change how I looked at ADHD. And the activity guide was really cool. So what we did with the activity guide is there's different scenarios in there because a lot of kids with ADHD, particularly my daughter, she missed social cues. She didn't understand personal space, things like that. And so what that book did is it gave us scenarios that we could play into and talked about what she would want to do in that situation, but then what was more socially acceptable. It also helped me eliminate distractions with her. So at the time, I was also homeschooling daycare kids. And so I'd have lots of little kids here, and she just did not understand personal space at all. And so it helped me create an environment that helped her better focus and have less distractions and helped her resist those areas where she struggled with, like personal space or impulsiveness. Keeping her hands off of people, and helped her really better her friendships and the relationships that she had by running through these scenarios. So those two books were absolutely phenomenal for us and really, really helped me when it came to homeschooling or just raising my ADHD daughter. So then after her came my son. Now, initially, I thought the differences with him was because he was a boy. But before too long, I realized it was so much more than that. With Daniel, we tried fidget toys, we tried exercise balls, we tried breaks, and much more. But homeschooling with ADHD was hard. It was really, really hard. I needed help, and I sought it out. I wrote about my boy's special needs and our journey with medication on the blog, so we did end up deciding to medicate. I don't regret it at all. Do-over, I would have done it sooner. Medication was an absolute lifesaver for us. Because he has so many other issues as well as ADHD, it really, really helped him. It helped him understand himself better. It helped him learn that there's nothing wrong with him. His mind just works differently. And it helped him give him a little bit of focus and the ability to function, which he needed. He was unable to function. And medication helped him. It gave me my son back. I will never apologize for medicating. I am a huge advocate for medication, particularly for kids like my son. Not every child with ADHD needs medicated, and I do believe that we are living in a society that over-medicates without a doubt. But for him and kids like my son, medication was a necessity. It's no different to me than if he was a diabetic needing insulin. That's the way I look at it now. And I did share about that. I was raw. I was real. I shared about the struggles. I will leave a link to that blog post in the show notes because I'm not going to get into all of that. It would take the whole episode. But I also shared about his apraxia story here on the podcast and on the blog, and I will leave a link to that as well. So that's a little bit of our ADHD story. I will say when it came to diagnosing Daniel with ADHD, I did not realize how much his ADHD had impacted our life until I was sitting in that therapist's office With Allison, the ADHD diagnosis was really easy. We went to one meeting and that was it. With Daniel, it took 3 meetings. And the first meeting was just me and my mom. And I broke down in that woman's office because I realized how separate of a lives we were living when we were together. One of us was always with him. We couldn't go on vacation without somebody needing constant attention with him. We were always separate. We always had to think, well, how's Daniel going to handle this? How's this going to happen? What are we going to do with him? And his needs really, really exasperated all of us. And I hadn't realized it, how much effort, how much work, how much parenting him was exhausting. And until that moment when I broke down. Daniel, at that point, before we started medication, he was in the process. He had, right after our first meeting, he broke 2 bones in his arm. He had no impulse control. He was a danger to himself. He was a danger to others, which means he required constant vigilance, constant attention. And when I broke down with her in the office that day, I realized how much I had needed help. She looked at me when I went over with her all of the accommodations that we had made so far in our homeschool, which I'm going to get into here in a little bit. And she said that she had never seen a parent come into her office having done so much research, so much work before the appointment that she literally had nothing else to recommend to me other than medication. That is how much work and effort we had put into homeschooling him. And it is exhausting. And if you are listening to this right now and you are homeschooling a child with ADHD and you have been to the point of tears, you have been to the point where you just don't know if you can do it anymore. You've considered public school. You have wondered how in the world you're going to survive. Let me just tell you, I have been there. I'm going to share with you in this podcast resources that have helped, some encouragement, and I hope that you stick around and know that you are not alone. So, moving on from our ADHD story. Why homeschool a child with ADHD? So for me, I knew that my daughter would be labeled early on in school. She sat still fine, but she struggled with getting distracted and in social situations. I knew for her she would fall through the cracks, like many, many girls with ADHD too. Now I see even more why homeschooling is the perfect education for a child with ADHD. So once we had Daniel's diagnosis, they gave us a list of accommodations to talk about in his IEP meeting, even though we had no intentions whatsoever of sending him to public school. Because Daniel's on a scholarship with his apraxia, we need an IEP. And so they still had to give us these accommodations. So some of the accommodations he would receive if he was in public school is one-on-one intervention each day for 15 to 30 minutes, a quiet space to take tests, no time limits on tests, help getting papers to and from school. And guess what? Those accommodations are taken care of just by homeschooling. Additional benefits of homeschooling a child with ADHD include that they don't stick out like a sore thumb. They fit in at home and are able to come to terms with their struggles in a loving environment and are not considered a hindrance. They can work at their own pace without feeling pressured to keep up with those in their class. They get one-on-one attention all the time, not just for 15 to 30 minutes a day. Homeschooling truly allows us to make accommodations for our special needs kids. So some accommodations that we have made through the years in our homeschool is allowing our kids to have quiet space to do school. So particularly this was important for my oldest, as she has with her ADHD, she needs a quiet space. And her brother was a huge distraction to her. So she takes her schoolwork and goes somewhere else, and she works mostly independently. Remove any distractions. So one big reason we no longer do school in our bright colored schoolroom is because the signs on the wall, the windows, and other things in that room really, really distracted my son. And also, like I said, we had to remove my daughter from her brother when she was doing school. So she takes her work and does her work in a separate room. Offer breaks regularly. So for us, this is 5 to 10 minutes after doing 20 minutes of work or in between each subject. Use a picture chart or a list to let your child see what needs to be completed each day. This has worked for both of my ADHD kiddos. They need this checklist to understand what comes next and what has to happen before they can get a break. Keep all the schoolwork stuff in one area. One big struggle those with ADHD have is a lack of executive function skills. So this means it is really, really hard for a child with ADHD to be organized. They will lose papers, school books, and other important resources like their teaching textbook discs. So homeschooling a child with ADHD, even though you're not in public school, homeschooling still is going to require accommodations. So these are some of the accommodations we've made. Homeschooling allows you to meet the needs of your child, but recognizing and researching accommodations that can happen that you can utilize in your homeschool environment is just as important as if they were in public school. I did not realize this completely until my boy, because his needs were more in depth than the needs of my daughter. So again, these are some accommodations we've made that have really, really helped.
We are interrupting this episode to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Beautiful Feet Books. Beautiful Feet Books is a homeschool history curriculum for students K through 12 using a Charlotte Mason style history curriculum that's literature rich, easy to use, and will inspire learning. Learn more about our sponsor, Beautiful Feet Books, by heading to bfbooks.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Now on to the episode.
Okay, so now we are going to get into some tools that can help your ADHD child. Tools and resources can be a huge, huge help for homeschooling the ADHD child. So I did a blog post on fidget toys or fidgety things that have helped in our homeschool, and I'll leave a link to those in the show notes. But fidget tools are huge, huge, huge help. They can play with them under the table, fidget while being read to, or use them while studying for a test. My oldest keeps little rubber band bracelets on her arm to fidget with, or she even keeps some little fidget toys in her purse that helps her focus. There is this new thing out that I have not got yet that I want to get her for her birthday or Christmas. So hopefully she doesn't listen to this, but it's fidget jewelry for girls. And I want to get some of these for her. And they're really cute, like little rings, bracelets, necklaces that are fidget. Like they've got little fidget balls or little fidget rings on them, but they're jewelry too, so they don't stick out. And that is a new resource that I just saw on a blog somewhere that I will leave a link to in the show notes. That is really cool. But you can also do like little keychains. So like Daniel has made these little circle rings, like they're like keychains, and you put beads on them, and so he like spelled his name on them, and so then he could also practice spelling his name when he was younger while moving those around. There's these little Velcro strips that you can put under your desk for your kids to fidget with and touch. That's especially good for sensory kids. I had a daycare parent tell me to use this on a table for her fidgety kid years ago, and I rolled my eyes. Yes, I'm serious. I never did it. But now that I have a fidgety child, I gave it a shot, and it really does work. Again, it works great, particularly for kids with sensory issues. They can't lose it. It's there all the time, and they can just touch it, and it really, really helps. Bouncy bands on the bottoms of chairs made a huge difference in my son. He was constantly moving his legs and wanting to get up and down until we put one of those bands on his school chair, and it keeps him in place. Colorful milk crates. These are perfect to hold all the school stuff. This tote can be moved from room to room for your older children with ADHD who need to get away from the noise, but it also keeps all of their resources in one place no matter where they are doing school. Soundproof headphones. These help your kids focus even when there are others around. They're also good to have for those kids who are doing work on the computer because it keeps the house a little bit quieter, keeps the noise to a minimum, and reduces distractions for those in the room with them. All of my kids have noise canceling headphones, but yet the headphones also work with their computer, so they can also do their schoolwork on the computer without having that noise distracting everybody else, but it also cancels out the noise from others. So I will leave a link to all of those in the show notes. The next thing I want to talk about when it comes to homeschooling a child with ADHD is curriculum for children with ADHD. Choosing a curriculum for a child with ADHD takes work because not all children with ADHD have the same learning style. I found that electronic resources work best for my boy, but my daughter does fine with textbooks. She doesn't like things on the computer as well as my son. So there are a few things that help when it comes to choosing a curriculum for an ADHD child. Again, most of the time, textbooks will not work for most ADHD kids. But if you have a child who does fine with them, let them continue to use them. Knotgrass History is a textbook-based history program, and my daughter loves it. I don't know if it's the bright pictures, if it's the fact that it's laid out really well, that she can still do it independently, but that is one textbook curriculum that she still uses and loves, as well as Apology of Science. Both of those are textbook, and most people would say they wouldn't work well for an ADHD kiddo, but for her, they work extremely well. For my son, electronic resources work the best. So for him, we have found Nessie Reading. 40% of kids with ADHD also have dyslexia, and my Daniel is one of those. And Nessie is a program that was created for kids with dyslexia, and it also tends to work wonderful for kids with ADHD because it's fast-paced. My pediatrician explained it like this. So kids with ADHD have minds that go nonstop. And so one reason they're so prone to electronics or so attracted to electronics is because it moves as fast as their minds do. And the same thing, it works the same way for curriculum that's online or computer-based curriculum. It moves really fast. They like the bright colors, they like the screens, and they learn so much better with it. So we've been using Nessie for his reading, and we also print off like the little worksheets and games that go along with it. And then we just started using Math Seeds for math, and it is also online. And both programs work really, really well for my ADHD kiddo. They've been a lifesaver, honestly. With him, textbooks do not work. So I cannot sit down with him with an Apologia textbook and get science done. I can't, and I hate that because we love Apologia. So for him, unit studies have worked best. So we've combined like Beautiful Feet Books history and Apology of Science. We've combined the two together to kind of do a unit study, and I'll leave a link to how I did that in the show notes. And that has worked out really, really well. Last year, we did all unit studies. We used schoolhouse teachers, and we would print off like some unit studies on science and social studies, and we did that. So for him, textbooks, he just will not sit through them. And so we are still in the process of figuring out what exactly works for him, but unit studies have been a big, big help for him, and particularly things that interest him. So this year we're studying around the world with Beautiful Feet books, and like I said, we're adding in the animals. He wanted to learn more about animals, so we're adding in the animals from the Apologia textbooks from these different countries, and we're just reading lots of regular picture books for him. So have lots of hands-on manipulatives for your ADHD kiddo. This matters because most kids with ADHD need to touch and feel what they are learning about. Foam letters for sight words, blocks for math, and other similar resources can be a huge assistance to kids with ADHD. Going along with this, I also want to mention that for Daniel, we sent him to an ADHD clinic that was near us that taught him breathing techniques, that gave him like some different fidget tools. And it was offered by our public school, and it was for kids with ADHD. And it really, really helped him learn or realize why his brain works differently, but also it gave him the tools and resources he needs to focus better at school. So that was school for me, like sending him there for that day. He learns a lot. If you have a program near you that offers something similar, I recommend taking your kids because he learned, like I said, breathing techniques. He learned that there wasn't anything wrong with him, that he just learned differently. And it also opened up my eyes on ways he learned. It gave me tools and resources to help him learn. And it was a wonderful, wonderful resource. If you have any thing near you for parents of ADHD kiddos, I highly recommend attending a conference, attending workshops. I'm going to leave a list in the show notes of resources that I've used, trainings I have attended online, podcasts I've listened to for ADHD parents. But going to something for you and your ADHD kiddo where there's other kids like you and other families like you is so important to realizing that you're not alone. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is actually the last thing, when it comes to homeschooling a child with ADHD, is to remember to take care of you. One thing I didn't realize when it comes to homeschooling a child with ADHD is how exhausted I would be. From sunup to sundown, I am caring and educating a child with ADHD. This is not an easy task. It is important to take the time to care for me, to have quiet and time to refresh. And so here are a few ways that you can have that happen. The first is to ask for a break. Don't feel guilty about this. Swap out with another parent. Leave when your husband gets home for an hour or two. Take time to get away. Next is educate yourself. I already talked about that some a bit. I'm going to leave a list to some amazing podcasts, some books out there for homeschooling with ADHD in the show notes. Implement 2 to 4 time today. 2 to 4 time is a rest time or a quiet time for your kids, even after they quit taking naps. This is so important because your child needs time to wind down and you need time away. I'm going to leave a link to the show notes for 2 to 4 time and how to implement that in the show notes below. I'm going to leave a link to that. So take time for yourself each morning. If you have a child like mine who gets up at the crack of dawn, remind them to stay in their room until a certain time. For us, that is 7 a.m. I showed him what that looks like on his clock at a young age, and if he got up before that and interrupted my morning time, then he lost electronics for the day. We still implement this. If he's in my room before 7 a.m., he loses his electronics for the day. Now, if there's something wrong, like he's sick or, has an accident, then there's times you don't punish them. But in general, if he just wants to get up in the middle of the night just to hug me and tell me he loves me, which he would do 27 times just to keep from sleeping, he loses his electronics. So, talk about your struggles. Join a support group. There are many out there online. I like the ADHD homeschooling support group and homeschooling the ADHD child support group. Both are on Facebook, and I'll leave a link to those in the show notes. And lastly, don't feel guilty for being exhausted. Seriously, I had a mom recently who felt bad about asking to be moved out of her child's class at co-op. I hugged her. I asked her, I was like, I said, I thought you would want to stay with this child. And she said, no. She's like, I want to be in another class. And I said, don't feel guilty for asking about that. I hugged her neck. I told her it was okay to need a break. And she did. No mom should be made to feel guilty for needing a break. Again, parenting a child with special needs is exhausting. Take time to care for yourself. Otherwise, you will not be able to care for your child. And let me just add to this that if you have people in your life who make you feel guilty for needing a break from your child, who make you feel bad for your child's behavior or make you feel like your child is less than, remove those people from your life. I had a friend who had a child just like my son, and I did make comments to her, and I look back now and I feel horrible about it. But I always hope I let her know that I loved her and loved her child. And I would always keep her child, and I would give her those breaks that she would need. But I always also made comments that I can never handle a child like that. But again, God has a sense of humor. But the people I'm talking about. I have had these people in my life through the years who would make comments that they couldn't keep Daniel because he was exhausting. Or there were times whenever we would literally be invited to birthday parties or events, and the invitations would say for the girls, like, find somebody to keep Daniel. We did not go to those events. My son is a part of my family. He is a part of my life. And if he's not welcome at your events or at your holidays or anything, then we're not coming. And I know he's exhausting. But the people that truly love you, the people that care about you and your kids are going to love your child despite their special needs. They're going to want to know how to help you. They're going to want to know how to love your child, how to build you up, not tear you down. And those are the people that you need when it comes to homeschooling a child with ADHD. Those are the people that you need in your life. People that understand you, understand your child, and want to help you. So remove those people from your lives if they ever make you feel less than or ever make your child feel less than. And please, please, please know that you are not alone when it comes to homeschooling a child with ADHD. I have been there. There are many moms who have been there. Check out the resources and the information in the show notes. And just know that you're not alone. Give yourself a pat on the back. You're doing an amazing job. And you can do this. and you are the best mom for your child. God does not make mistakes. Sometimes he has a sense of humor, but he does not make mistakes, and he gave his child, your child, the parent that they need to grow up in this world and to become who exactly God created them to be, and that is you. So give yourself a pat on the back. You're doing an amazing job. That is it for this episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast. I hope it encouraged you if you're homeschooling a child with ADHD. If you would like more tips, more encouragement, a one-on-one chat with me, I do offer homeschool consultation. I will leave a link to that in the show notes, and I would love to talk to you about homeschooling your ADHD child, resources that can help, maybe help you come up with a plan for homeschooling your child. But also be sure to check out the resources in the show notes. I'm going to leave links to books, leave links to podcasts, leave links to blog articles, Facebook groups that have helped and encouraged me. And I hope this is a wonderful resource that can help you homeschool your ADHD child. So until next time, have a wonderful day, guys. Thanks. Bye.
This has been an episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast. I thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to leave a rating or review on iTunes or whatever platform it is that you use to listen to this podcast. That tells the powers to be I'm not talking to myself. Also, hit subscribe. Then you will catch every episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast each week right there in your podcast feed. You can find show notes and more at joyfullyhomeschooling.com and clicking on the episode number of the episode you are looking for. Thanks, guys. I hope this podcast encouraged you to head out there and have a more joyful homeschool.